Good evening, everyone. May I ask you, who is an alum in the room? Raise your hands. Wonderful. I think that's the biggest group of alums we've ever had at one of these events. These events in the Leadership Essentials series are actually made for you. We want alums to come back to re-engage with the School of Management, to get exposed to some interesting content and very interesting speakers. And tonight we have such a very interesting speaker whom I'm going to introduce to you in just a moment. Before I do that, however, I would like to remind you that there are so many ways to stay in touch with the School of Management, and in the back at the table there are these little postcards that have all these ways listed with QR codes. So take out your smartphones and like us on Facebook and subscribe to our Twitter handle. That's the best way really to know about what's going on at the School of Management. And if you take out your smartphones, you might as well live tweet from tonight's event and post something nice about us. So, our speaker, Bryan Brown. By vocation, Bryan Brown is a Wall Street market strategist, and by evocation, he is an eco-adventure traveler. During the summer of 2015, Bryan Brown successfully completed the longest solo, unsupported kayak descent of Canada's Mackenzie River watershed in history. This 2,100-mile effort, picture this, 2,100 miles in a kayak, was designed to link the ultimate source of the watershed with the Beaufort Sea in Canada's remote Northwest Territories. The Mackenzie River watershed is the third largest watershed on Earth after the Nile and the Amazon, and is the last of the 10 largest watersheds on Earth to be successfully navigated from source to mouth. This effort, in conjunction with Bryan Brown's two other historic source-to-mouth kayak descents, in 2013, the 2,400-mile solo run of the primary Colorado River watershed, and 2014's 2,300-mile solo run of the Yukon River established him as one of the most prolific solo adventure travelers of the modern era. And that also has been honored very recently. Bryan Brown, and he will tell us more about that, I'm pretty sure, has been inducted into the Explorers Club. For those of you who are not familiar with that, he has some pretty interesting peers in that club by the name of Sir Edmund Hillary and Roald Amundsen. So I think to most of you these names will ring a bell, and Bryan Brown is part of that distinguished group now. And we are really happy to have him here with us tonight, share his stories, and also share his wisdom of how he uses his experiences to learn some very valuable leadership lessons that I hope he will share with us and that you will take home. So enjoy the evening, stay connected with us. Bryan Brown, thanks for being with us.
Thanks so much for having me. I'm honored to be here. I'm greatly pleased to be a part of this event, which is an ongoing event that's designed to help the MBA students here find their niches, among other things, and we hope we can do this. I won't spend much time on the upfront here on Steve Jobs. I think he said pretty much all he needs to say right there. We'll move on. What we're at here is an event called the Leadership Essentials, and our topic of the evening is the essential Pathfinder. All good Pathfinders, leaders are trailblazers. I'm going to move a little bit out here. It's hard for me to see that. So the mission here, I think what's important about this is that the mission statement for CLU is that CLU is looking to develop generational leaders. I'm not sure I know how to do this. I'm going to move a little bit out here. So the mission statement here is that CLU develops generational leaders with transformative agendas who act with a purpose to shape the future. This is a big, tall order, and hopefully we can address some of these issues. This is not, there we go, this evening. So the goals of this thing this evening are a knowledge transfer, which hopefully I'll be able to pull off, a networking focus, which I know I can pull off, leadership principles, which I think I can pull off, even though I travel as an army of one, and immediate usefulness, which is a little bit iffy. We'll see. This, the people we'll deal with tonight here start with Robert Falcon Scott, Roald Amundsen. This is a guy named Adam Osborne. Probably nobody in the room knows him. Rod Canyon. I'll explain who these people are later. That's Eleanor Ostrom, an LA native. Martin Luther King Jr. Kathleen Graham. Marie Curie. Walt Disney. Linus Pauling. And Rosalind Franklin, who I think probably nobody in the room knows. We'll start with an Explorers Club member. This is Sir Edmund Hillary, the inspirational Pathfinder. He said, people do not decide to become extraordinary. They decide to accomplish extraordinary things. He was a very down-to-earth guy. He was extremely accomplished at what he did, which was a number of things, and he was a great humanitarian as well. We go from the inspirational Pathfinder to the peerless Pathfinder, and if you can only take one name away with you tonight, only one, it would be Roald Amundsen, because aside from the fact that he was an incredible adventurer and explorer, he was an outrageously good organizational behavior and management guy. He said, adventure is just bad planning. Victory awaits him who has everything in order. Luck, people call it. This is Daniel Boone, who said, as the practical trailblazer, I can't say I was ever lost, but I was bewildered once for 3 days. And this is the everyman trailblazer. I call that guy Wild Bryan. What you're seeing here is Tame Bryan. And Wild Bryan says, if this guy can do it, so can you. The knowledge transfer starts here. And it starts with a negative example. If you look carefully, you can see that there are 2 trailblazers up that mountain. Those of you who are skiers or mountaineers will be able to tell that there are 2 avalanche channels in this photo, one here and one here. This one right here is a little smoother. It's been snowed on, so there have been no avalanches at least since the last snow. This one is active right this minute. This is called a shear wall, and it's trying to give way right this minute. And if you look down here, you can see a stone that's the size of a house that's already rolled down off that mountain this year. So what we have here are some trailblazers who are going from point A to who knows where, point B, and they've chosen the highest risk possible way to do it. They are now at a point where they only have 3 options, and all 3 of them are potentially lethal. This is not how you do it. Pathfinder motivations range from bucks to bragging rights, and meaning that everybody ultimately wants to monetize what it is they do. The bragging rights go kind of with that monetization, and among those are Jobs and Gates, J.P. Morgan and Andrew Carnegie. Looking back, if you study up on Magellan and Columbus, they were after some bucks as well. So, the knowledge base from Tame Bryan is this. I bring 36 years of Wall Street experience to the table today. I've experienced and survived, without ever having been fired, 9 buyouts. Sandy, who's on the executive council here for the School of Management, survived another 5. Anybody who's been through one knows that you go through them as a couple. So between the 2 of us, we have 14 total buyouts in about a little over 30 years. So that's 1 every 2 years. The point behind this is there's constant change, particularly in the securities and financial service businesses. I have experience with all possible work environments under all possible circumstances. I spent about 10 years bi-coastal, LA, New York, every other week. I worked for Rotan Mosley, which was the world's premier energy boutique at the top of the 1979 energy cycle. And so there are interesting stories from that. The firm, which was the most efficient firm on Wall Street in history with respect to institutional investor All-Americans and a thing called the Greenwich poll, which measures effectiveness for securities management, totally missed that top. So I spent the first 3 years of my career learning how not to do things. It was a harsh experience, a mercenary environment. We did 100-plus hour weeks. We had constant deadlines, constant change, constant challenge. I wouldn't trade it for a thing. And subsequently, on top of that, I have these 3 world records now. So what do Pathfinders embrace that can transfer into the business world? Change, diversity, which is important to all of us. It allows, the notion is that anybody who's doing trailblazing, whether it's in the corporate world or outside, is trying to develop their own judgment, their own opinions. They do so, hopefully, by avoiding groupthink, but they still have to buy in to group prerogatives. That's the way the world works. Once the group in a business decides on a process or a product, everybody has to get behind that product. There is no such thing as no in this world. You have to find a way to make every no a conditional yes. And you need to give credit where credit is due. So the structure for expedition planning is the same as it is basically the matrix as it is for planning a process in the business world. Identify just 4 things. You can buy software that allow you to do this. There are books. You can do it on index cards. The 4 things you have to do is obviously determine goals, contributors, deadlines, and budgets. Then you have to either demand if you have the power to do it or assert if you don't. That accountability for everybody involved. You should never miss a deadline, and that's actually how we got to where we are right now. We're known for not missing deadlines. And once you finish that project, you should always expand the scope, ask for more money, rinse and repeat. So project management, interestingly enough, like expedition management, is the only process that's progressive on this planet that works backwards. So you choose the date first, and then everything has to come back from the date. It can be complex, difficult. It's not that hard once you get it down. So the project management framework, from my perception, suggests that you should ignore all preconceptions, no matter what anybody brings to the table. Assume that you don't know anything. Start from scratch. Memorialize the mission with a half-page abstract. This is important. If you can't put the goal in less than half a page, you don't understand it. Start with a deadline. Work backwards. Compile important issues, however those issues come to you, however you get at them. You compile those issues, you extract essence from them, try to divide them into systemic or specific issues, convert that essence into goals so you make something constructive out of it. So if the problem is that the keystroke, the keyboard on the computer that you're producing is miskeying, the goal is stop that from happening. You should categorize all of these items by affinity, then connect the dots between similar groups, connect the dots between similar items, rank them all hierarchically, execute, then once again, you've shown that you're competent, you expand your scope, ask for more money, and repeat it. And if you don't get that money and you've been successful and you're on time, on budget, and on target, then find somebody who appreciates it. So the best practices here: lean in, life is short, there's plenty to do out there, push back if principles are at risk, don't compromise your principles. Question dogma, which I think is a little bit of an oxymoron there. It's a dogmatic statement about dogma. Avoid toxic environments. That's hard to do. Stress literacy skills. This is important. The American Booksellers Association quotes information that it got from the, if I'm not mistaken, the Jefferson Foundation. 2 key points here. College graduates, according to the American Booksellers Association, 42% of college graduates never read another book after they graduate from college. High school graduates who don't go on to college, 90% of them never read another book from the time they graduate from high school. Read books. Books are good. All right, so maxims. I'm not going to waste time with a lot of these. I think the most important one is that all negativity is fear and that all fear is counterproductive. No matter what you're doing, keep negativity out of it. Period. Just do it. And even more important than that is if you don't like what you're doing, reinvent yourself so that you do something you do like. You can do it any time, any age, any way, and ask yourself, what is stopping me? So these will be, I think, a little more entertaining. These are my Pathfinder rules. The cell phone filter rule comes from a concert that Sandy and I sat in on, a James Taylor concert. People all around us in very good seats had their cell phones up and they're watching James Taylor through their cell phone while they record it for God knows who. So they're recording this thing. So what it does is removes the immediacy from the situation. You've got a world-class person up there performing. Let somebody else do it and watch it on YouTube if you need it. Embrace that moment And that also applies to the uniqueness rule, which is seek out. All uniqueness comes from the same place. It doesn't matter if it's business, climbing, canoeing, kayak, whatever it is. Seek out people who are doing interesting and creative things and shake their hand. It'll rub off on you. The 3 crisis rule is, and this is a real rule that I use, never quit until you have your 3rd adult crisis. And we're talking, you know, a bloodletting crisis, something really bad, and then don't quit. Successful failures rule. Case studies, we all do these case studies, and we study failures and we study successes. Don't study the failures that ultimately fail, only study the ones that ultimately succeeded. Walt Disney is a great case in point, and we'll go into a few of those. So what you want is somebody that ultimately may have been through some hard times, but has shown that they know a way to get around those hard times. The old person rule is this. Old people have been here before. The fact that we're all in an internet age or whatever is immaterial. They have figured out how to deal with problems that we can learn from this. If you find somebody out there who's a retired executive, go shake their hand, ask them what you can learn from them. The on time, on target, on budget rule is exactly that. Be on time, on target, on budget, and nobody's going to fire you. The challenge by challenge rule. This applies to everybody who's got that type A personality, whether they're in business or not. People that do these things, the Steve Jobses of the world, even Bill Gates, who if you look at him doesn't look like all that competitive a guy. He's intensely competitive. People like me, people like Hillary, who I'm not comparing myself with, that just came out of the blue, but they are challenged by the concept of challenge. And that challenge allows them to raise the level of their performance. The map rule is there ain't no maps. There are no maps to be had. You have to draw your own map. And the rule is there are no rules. Make your own rules. So the takeaways. Make your icons your rivals. They're lonely. They want you there. They would love to see somebody new in their coterie. Plan everything like your life depends on it, whether it's in business or not. Execute like you're bulletproof. You might not be, but you might as well try. On occasion, you're going to have to hold your nose and jump. And each new chapter in your life requires that you survive the last one, so everything you do has to be oriented towards surviving the last one. This is not about pushing the limits to the point where you know you're on the verge of dying. It's about keeping the lip of the abyss away from you and being able to do the next one. If I can leave you with now, I told you if I could leave you with one person, it would be Roald Amundsen. The second person that's going to be important, I think, in the next decade going forward and more is Elinor Ostrom, who most people here won't know. We'll introduce you to her. Networking. Functional networks mature into strategic networks as your colleagues mature into leaders. So it's important to get that network going now for those of you who are younger and expand it for those of you who are older. Don't alienate anybody because that newbie might be your boss somewhere down the road. Start now. You can find 5 contacts in this room before you leave. In your classes, organized by affinity groups, whether it's by skill, outside interests, or industry, do it early in the semester so you know who to call on when you need them. Read Brian Grazer's book, A Curious Mind. This is an important book. This guy is really remarkable. Part of the whole deal behind using his procedure, which is to seek other people out and learn from them, is to offer something before asking. Not everybody's out there to help you with your career. Everybody is, however, out there to help you learn about how to be a better person. Engage the faculty here. CLU takes this very seriously. Your success is their success, so you need to use them as part of your network. An effective network is better than a big network. Start big, hone it down. If you're time challenged, ask what you can do with the time available to you, and if you get a no, which you might get occasionally, if you, say, want to donate time to heal the bay, if somebody tells you no, give them the quote from William Hewlett from Hewlett-Packard, which is, nobody with sense ever turns down let me back up. Nobody with sense ever turns down a gracious moment. That's not the right word. I'm going to come back to that in a minute. So networking, diplomatically, just refuse to hear the word no. Ask questions that don't allow people to say no. Ask questions in such a way that they have to say yes, but, or maybe, but never no. Engineer second chances. If you get a no and somebody said, you heard them say, I like dogs, write that down on the back of the business card, spend 2 weeks, then Google up something unique about dogs and send it to them in the mail and see if you can't get them to focus on you. Be selective about who you seek advice from. Not everybody has good advice to give, and not everybody wants to give it, particularly not to people they don't know. So the best way to expand your network is to survive a buyout. The best way to create a great one is to survive 9 of them. And the best way to survive a buyout is keep your head down, keep working, don't gossip, don't get tied up in the moment, just keep doing what you're doing. The other guy will get fired. Leadership. Initially, we are all an army of one. So a good leader hits the beach as that disciplined army of one. That's what I am. When I go on these adventures, I am not looking to make, I am looking to do something important. Hopefully I'll tell you that in a moment. But what I'm looking to do is maintain a grip on everything that I encounter in such a way that none of it is lethal. Lead yourself effectively, others will follow, and success will broaden your sphere of influence. So in the corporate environment, generally it's a rational environment. I say generally, there's always an Enron out there. There are fewer truly lethal crises in that environment, but it offers you the opportunity for repetitive learning. Multiple decision pathways present themselves. You get to learn about all of those different pathways. Judgment in those organizations is collaborative. It's dynamic and scalable. The entire corpus of those decisions is available to you, and if you don't understand, you can ask, because no manager with any sense is not going to ask a question about why a decision was made. So immediate usefulness. Here's where I flounder, because I have no idea what you can use here. There we go. So my point to you would be that self-motivation, is the most infectious virus on the planet. If you can drive yourself in a way that makes you enhance your responsibility, people are going to pay attention. Scalable skills and behaviors are the original fat tail phenomena, and the ecological sector of this economy is a fat tail sector looking forward for the next at least 100 years. Immediate usefulness again. Whoops. This door apparently is. Okay, major career and investment themes. These are for those of you who are looking for a way to make your resume work. There are 30 of these. These are all oriented toward environmental/ecological issues. Water resources and allocation. Resource securitization. I'm going to focus on a couple of these at the end of this. Environmental policy. Mediation. Alternative energy, solar energy, wind, LEED, that's an environmental design issue. Environmental product design, vertical industry integration. The economics of ecology right now are such that there are a lot of small islands in the stream. They're ultimately going to have to be tied together and integrated vertically in order to make sense. Sustainability analysis, large-scale recycling, business ethics, experience modeling, environmental economics, focus on resource securitization. This is a highly fragmented industry. It's a highly fragmented field. It's based on law that dates back to British common law all the way back as far as 1300. It is incredibly complex, and it's going to have to be simplified. Environmental economics is just an astoundingly powerful field right now, and it has incredible policy potential. The next step, bioengineering, remediation, accident prevention, aquaculture, battery technology, practical genome research, technology transfer, which is ultimately what brings me here. I did this for Exxon in the 70s from their think tank in Houston. They were developing products related to the energy industry that they could not monetize and didn't want to monetize. They were outside of the primary business. And so they had people like me doing prospectuses and sending them out to the securities business. Venture capital, angel investing, hydroponics, data mining, domestic water rights, international water rights, again, very, very complex areas, international supply chain management, and health informatics because of the fact that our environment and ecology impacts everything downstream of it from a health standpoint. Flint, Michigan is a perfect case in point. Battery technology is a particularly interesting area for those of you with technological background. And venture capital obviously is always one that interests those of us here in the Southland. Technology transfer I mentioned is the way I got here. The skills required, written and verbal communication skills. The millennials have focused too much on 140 digits. They're going to have to get a little more focused on this whole thing. And a good thing to keep in mind is a saying from a Nobel laureate named Octavio Paz, who was a literature Nobel laureate from Mexico. And he said, "How do I know what I think till I see what I say?" The idea being that the process of writing something down changes the way that you review it, and as a result, it changes the way you think about it. It's an iterative process, so the more you write, the more focused the piece that you're working on becomes. So legal skills, and that doesn't necessarily mean being a lawyer, it means being aware and cognizant of legal issues. Administrative, financial, and mathematical modeling, multimedia, social media, negotiation, mediation, arbitration, needs-based assessment, a second language, and an international mindset. Complex, very complex project management. And here's a joke. Sandy and I were in, it's the only joke I know. Sandy and I were in Africa. And once our guide in the middle of nowhere got to know us and realized that we wouldn't be offended by this, and I should point out that a lot of people in Africa speak a tribal language, a local language, a regional language, and then a tourist language. So they might speak two local languages and then Italian, French, English on top of that. He said, here in Africa we say if you speak 3 languages, you're trilingual. If you speak 2 languages, you're bilingual. If you speak 1 language, you're American. We need to get beyond that. The next phase here is multilingual. So, expedition experience, which is basically just project management. This brings me to the things I've done over the last 3 years, which are not random. And I should point out in advance that I say I've done the first or this or that. So initially what I need to do is this. I research these things very carefully before I do them. I make these statements with full knowledge that I think they're supportable. I also make them knowing that there are some remarkable people out there that knock big issues out and then they just walk off and do something else. So if somebody pops up and says, hey, I already did that, and they have a good claim, more power to them. The world's big enough for all of us. So what I did in 2013 was the first solo unsupported kayak descent of the Colorado River watershed. This is both the Green River and the upper and lower Colorados. 2,400 miles, it took about 100 days. I carried a package of my brother's ashes along. My brother and I planned this trip for 41 years before I pulled it off. And he died, and that's what prompted me to go ahead and get it done. The government did not like this idea. It took permits in areas where they didn't really want to give permits. The fact that I got it done, they were surprised at. I had to do the Grand Canyon with a commercial venture. With respect to the Colorado number crunching, we're in a 500-year drought, and that's just one of 3 or 4 different alternatives that might be occurring right now, but at least 500. California uses 30% of the water that comes down the Colorado River. The Colorado River does not go to the Sea of Cortez and has not gone there since 1942. Lake Mead is now down 50% from its peak. Lake Powell is down 60%. The LA population is projected to double by 2050. And indicator species all along the way, I'm an animal person. I'm documenting what's going on as I come down. Indicator species are stressed throughout. This entire watershed is stressed. Scripps Institution in San Diego said this, not Bryan Brown. There's a 50% chance that live storage in the Lake Powell and Lake Mead will be gone by 2021. Live storage is the amount of water that's used for the things that the lakes were designed to do, which is electrical power and water for big cities. 50% chance that they'll be below the levels they were designed for within 5 years. At the same time, the population of this area is expected to double in the next 35. Step 2, after seeing a heavily modified watershed, the Colorado, which is only 10% the same as it was when John Wesley Powell came through in 1869. 90% of it has been altered in one way or another. I decided to choose to take a look at the most pristine watershed left in North America. That's the Yukon River. The U.S. Geological Survey has only determined in 1999 what the source of this river was, and it's called the Llewellyn Glacier in the Juneau ice field. So I paddled the wrong way, a long way down Atlan Lake to the Llewellyn Glacier, turned around and kayaked this 2,300 miles all the way across the state of Alaska to finish in the Bering Sea approximately 88 miles from Russia. The McKenzie watershed, Gerhard went through what it is. It's one of the largest watersheds on Earth. It is an incredibly complex one. I did that this last summer. The reason I did that is the Colorado is heavily modified. The Yukon is not modified. The McKenzie is undergoing some dam building right now, and it's about 80% unchanged at the moment. So what we have is something that we've clearly screwed up, something that the Canadians, based upon our model, are in the process of screwing up, and something that is really, truly pristine, no more than 2% altered from its original place. That's the goal in the long run. It's a lifetime goal, and those of you out there that are a little younger are going to be the people that follow through on this from an ecological standpoint. So why? I have a key goal. I have a second goal that I haven't stated yet, and that's because I travel solo with an ecological agenda, albeit a rational one, in very remote areas where not everybody likes tree huggers. And so I purposefully have stayed below the radar on some of these things. This is not my first rodeo. I did the Appalachian Trail. You can see up there on the right, 2006, I did a solo transcontinental bicycle ride. That's me on Bull Street in Savannah, then some canoe trips. We'll move in. Notice that I had a tan line right there from cycling shorts. I rode a bicycle from Dallas to Atlanta to get there. This is what National Geographic had to say about me. This is where you can see it for yourself if you're a doubter. Oops. In 2015, sorry. All right, so my peer group now consists of 3 people. Alexander Doba crossed the Atlantic in a big modified kayak in 2014. He was the National Geographic Adventurer of the Year for 2014 and 15. Freya Hoffmeister just circumnavigated South America. She's currently a nominee for the 2015-2016 Adventurer of the Year. I am the underachiever in the group. I am, however, as of 2015, now a member of the Explorers Club. This is a perfect example of a network that worked. This club has sponsored a bunch of people that have done really good things, big things. I was inducted in the fellowship level, which is a level that is above entry level for the reasons listed there. A friend of mine happened to hear I sent a terse 6-line email when I finished this trip. No punctuation, no capitalizations on the McKenzie, and it said, just did X, Y, Z, 200 bears, yada, yada, yada. And he looked at it apparently and was shocked. Sent it on to David Concannon, who you can see there has led 6 Titanic expeditions and the Apollo F1 engine research and recovery project that was funded by Amazon's Jeff Bezos. He saw it and said, oh my gosh, you know, I need to sponsor this guy. And he lined up Joseph Dituri to be my second. Joseph is what I can't say in print that I can say verbally is he's Major Special Forces retired guy, deep water diver kind of fellow, is a very, very serious explorer in all ways. Where do I work? This is the big picture. That's the Colorado River watershed. That's the Yukon River watershed. That's the McKenzie River watershed. Maybe you're getting the basic notion of where I'm focused here. This is an example of how a trip works. The McKenzie started right here at Tutati Lake, went to the Finley River, Williston, Peace River, Slave River, Great Slave Lake, Mackenzie River, Beaufort Sea. That's what it looked like at the beginning, high in the Canadian Rockies, all alone up there, running into about 200 of these in 2,100 miles. That's a mother and cub of last year. Those are grizzlies. I don't carry a weapon, by the way. I carry bear spray and a thing called a bear banger, which is kind of like a firecracker, effectively. Storms were epic up there. This is what they look like coming at you. Every time you see one of these coming at you, you have to stop and think about whether or not you need to take action. This is the aftermath of the most extreme storm in recorded history on Great Slave Lake, which is near the Arctic Circle. Everything is drying out there. They recorded with weather satellites 78,000 lightning strikes in 6 days. By comparison, the Grand Canyon, which is electrically very active, had 23,000 lightning strikes in the entire year of 2014. So on Great Slave Lake, I experienced ultimately got washed out of my campsite by a storm that had 3 times the number of lightning strikes in 6 days that the Grand Canyon has in an entire year. These are our featured folks of the evening. We'll start with Scott and Amundsen, who were in a race to the South Pole in 1911. Scott, on the left, you can see has slightly different clothing, and ultimately you'll see a different rig on the left. Amundsen, aside from looking very austere, is in completely different clothing. That plays in a moment. That is a full-length look at what Amundsen wore and used, skis, as opposed to what Scott used, which was canvas clothing that was not windproof, no skis. He took along with him dogs, Russian ponies from Siberia, motorized sledges that didn't work very well, skis, and everything else you could think of, and ultimately they made the decision to walk to the South Pole. Amundsen made it. Scott didn't. Scott actually did, but he didn't make it back. So on the left there, you'll notice that he decided to redesign the sledges they used. That's a narrow wheelbase here. And notice that he has a high center of gravity on his load. As opposed to that, Amundsen used a Greenland sledge, which has a wide wheelbase. It has the ability to lift it over cracks in the ice and pressure ridges. It's designed so that all of the gear has to have a low center of gravity. He thought about everything. Everything. He made it to the South Pole and back, no problems. Scott changed his plan at the last moment. He had 2 4-man teams. At the last depot they dropped off, and then he had several teams with him. They would set a depot, and then one group would go back. They would set another depot and go back, set another depot, go back. They got down to 2 4-man teams, set the final depot. Everything was planned around 4 people. And at the last moment, he decided to keep 1 person from the other 4-man team. He sent 3 people back. He kept 5 on the assault team. 5 people for which when the depots were only set for 4. They made another mistake too. They used leather gaskets in the canisters that held their fuel. Those leather gaskets were not waterproof, and the fuel evaporated through them, and so they found that they didn't have anything to cook with when they got to some of these things. The bottom line is, on the way back, 11 miles from a 10-ton depot of food, Scott and 4 other people perished of cold and starvation. Now, what he said was what Hillary said, and what Mallory, the first guy to try Everest, said was, which is basically, why do you climb mountains? Because they're there. We're all adventurers here. We're doing wild things in wild countries. So Amundsen, a member of the Explorers Club, said adventure is just bad planning. Sorry. And victory awaits him who has everything in order. People call that luck. That's not what Amundsen called it. He was so meticulous that he took dogs with him. He brought with him a ski maker, a champion skier, a champion marksman, an incredible mechanic. people who had done huge crossings of Greenland. One guy who was part of an expedition that got stuck in the ice on the way to the North Pole for 3 years. So he was known for exceptionally detailed planning. Those of you who want to learn about organizational behavior and management should study this guy. He got it. He got it down to the details. He designed the place they lived before they set out on this thing called Framheim. He designed it in such a way that it took advantage of the fact that the dogs, unfortunately, will eat their own offal. And so they would collect it up and put it into a shaft so that the dogs would have a place to supplement their own food. They also, unfortunately, planned and carried out their plan to sacrifice their dogs and eat them on the way back from the South Pole, and they did that. This is Adam Osborne. Slightly lighter note. He was born in Thailand. He was a British national. Anybody here know Adam Osborne? Know of him? He's dead now. He likened himself to Henry Ford. He developed the first portable computer, and it looked like this. That thing weighed about 25 pounds. It had a really small screen on it because he adapted a screen that was used in oscilloscopes at the time. This is about 1980. This one was built in 1981. If you look in the lower right here, it had WordStar embedded in it. It also had VisiCalc, a spreadsheet program developed by a guy named Dan Bricklin and Ben Frankston embedded in it. So it was an absolute turnkey process. It weighed 25 pounds. He was the first, by the way, he made his money writing books, the original Computers for Dummies books. He made his money, very lucrative publishing business, and then he started out to do this. He developed it, and it cost a lot of money at the time, 1,800 bucks. He was shipping 10,000 units a month, and it had all these embedded issues in it. The Osborne effect is unfortunately the result of the fact that he could not keep his mouth shut. He announced that the Osborne 2 was coming along and it was going to knock the Osborne 1 into the stratosphere. The news leaked before the supply chain was complete. It killed all the demand for Model 1. He had no cash flow to finish the production of Model 2. Bankruptcy ensued. The lesson learned there is obsolescence beats extinction. He should have left no gap in the supply chain. This is Rod Canyon. Maybe you know him. He's the guy behind Compaq Computer. He was at Texas Instruments. He sketched out, he and two other guys reverse engineered the IBM system back at about the time that Osborne was going under. Ben Rosen, the financier, financed them. And he said, you've got to identify something that's new and innovative, not been out there. That's always been the formula and always will be. Interestingly enough, at the same time Osborne was going under, Compaq was using the same form factor and making a go of it. They called this a luggable. Ultimately, they cut it in half and called it a lunchbox. Compaq Computer, on a good idea, well executed, became the largest first-year sales company in history, the fastest to the Fortune 500, and to the $1 billion marks in history. You can read the other things there. They particularly were good at their pricing. They had a dealer channel that allowed dealers to set their own margins without impacting the margins of Compaq. And they supported that by advertising at the national level with corporate dollars rather than allowing the dealers to advertise regionally with their own dollars. So ultimately what Canyon did is he led 80 people, 80 other groups, to force an open source concession, and it was a revolt, and it was successful. Now what it did was immediately wreck the dealer channel model because consumers lost the incentive to pay up for Compaq products, and the dealer channel margin shrank, corporate profits fell. Ultimately, he's ousted, and Compaq is purchased by Hewlett-Packard, and in 2013, they retired the name entirely without an announcement. So that's the law of unintended consequences. This is Eleanor Ostrom, somebody who I think will be interesting for all of us in the next quarter century, maybe more. She said, we haven't learned in Washington that you have to have real involvement, not just somebody passing down rules. Now, she's from here. She's a Nobel laureate in 2009 in economics. She was the first woman to win. She wanted to get an economics PhD from UCLA, and they wouldn't let her do it because she took time off to work to put her husband through law school. So as a result, she took a degree, an advanced degree in political science, and still worked in economics backhandedly. Her major work had to do with the tragedy of the commons, which is the notion of how collective resources need to be managed for all of our collective good. We all own a part of national parks, for instance. How do we all get our fair share? So her focus is on polycentric management of collective resources, very complex organizational management. This is an incredibly fruitful potential place for careers. She was voted named one of the most influential people of the last century, and the lesson learned there is genius cannot be denied. Martin Luther King Jr. said, if I cannot do great things, I can do small things in a great way, and we can all do that. Of course, he did great things, and those are some of them. We'll pass that. I don't think we need to spend time on such a great man. Everybody should know him. By the way, I saw him. My mother took me to see him in 1964 at Ball State University in Indiana. Katharine Graham, pardon me, said, to love what you do and feel like it matters, how could anything be more fun? And she was, at the time, the first American female to hit the Fortune 500. Sorry about that. At the Washington Post, she hired Ben Bradley, oversaw the entire Watergate era, supported Woodward and Bernstein, ultimately published the Pentagon Papers, which are being compared to what Snowden did with the NSA leak. It's not the same thing. Don't buy it. And she won a Pulitzer Prize on her own. So the lesson learned there is the pen really is mighty. Marie Curie, interesting woman, said each of us must share a general responsibility for humanity. She was the first female Nobel laureate. She was the first person and only female to win twice. She won in 2 different fields. There were 5 Nobels in her immediate family within 1 generation of her. She was the first female professor at the absolute bastion of male sensibility at University of Paris. She was the first female buried in the Pantheon. She discovered polonium and radium. And she developed the practical use of X-rays that she did herself on the front lines in World War I. She took these little units out just behind the front lines and took X-rays of injured soldiers. Lesson learned there is you can get her done. These 3 people are all interesting in their own way. We'll do these more quickly. Walt Disney just said, we don't look back. Linus Pauling, who won 2 Nobel Prizes, 1 for peace and 1 for chemistry, said, do it to others 25% better. Rosalind Franklin, once again, said we can help each other. She was behind the Watson and Crick development of the double helix. Watson and Crick were working with the assumption that it was a triple helix until they saw her crystallography that clearly showed an X pattern consistent with a double helix. And they didn't give her credit, and neither did the Nobel group. And in 1982, her associate won a Nobel for virus work. She had died, and we should all know that the Nobels are never given posthumously, so she should have had 2. The rainbow phenomenon. William James said the greatest discovery of any generation is that a human can alter his life by altering his attitude, and indeed they can. You can do what you want to do. We're seeing environmental erosion out there. Part of my goal here is to focus attention so that people find that what they have an opportunity to disbelieve is really ineffectively disbelieved. There's a change going on out there. You don't have to call it global warming change. You don't have to call it anything. You just have to note that something is different, and hopefully we'll make some points there. So this is nothing but trash. This is plastic floating around in the Pacific Ocean. This particular grouping here, this gyre, is bigger than Alaska. This one is twice the size of Alaska. That's a lot of trash out there in the ocean. How do we gauge what's happening with this kind of pollution? We use sentinel species like polar bears. We use sentinel species like beluga whales. Beluga whales are transpolar. The northern people eat them. They eat what's called muktuk, their outer blubber. It dissolves fat-soluble chemicals, persistent organic pollutants. As a result, in many places where the pollutants are particularly plentiful, they're sterilized before they die, so they can't reproduce, and then they still ultimately die of toxicity. There are a few places on Earth where there are resident populations that do not wander globally. One of those is off the mouth of the Susitna River outside of Anchorage, Alaska, and it's an embattled population. One of them is at the mouth of the Mackenzie River, and one of them is the St. Lawrence River in Canada. When these things die in Canada, they are treated as toxic waste. They are collected by people in hazmat suits. Those are totoaba. It is a large drumfish. And it's found right at the mouth of the Colorado River, which, as I just told you, does not go to the sea. Right at the top of the Sea of Cortez, the Gulf of California. They grow to be about 200 pounds. They are co-resident with the smallest porpoises on Earth. These are called vaquitas. They only grow to be 3 feet long. They share the same small area. Fishermen are paid $100 per bladder for the bladders from totoabas in China, where they're used to celebrate business deals, among other things. So they catch catch the most physically mature fish in the population, and they're endangered. They rip the bladder out of it, eat what they can, sell what they can, but they don't export it. They take the bladders, put them into packages, and sell them for $100 a piece. And the co-catch, the bycatch, is these animals right here. There are now 450 of them left. They are one of the most sensitive sentinel species anywhere on Earth, and we can do something. This is the North America that is my home for the last 3 years, and actually the last 59. Those are wood bison. Those are whooping cranes. That's the Colorado River watershed. That's the Mackenzie River watershed. That is Wood Buffalo National Park, a UNESCO World Heritage Site and the largest park in Canada. It's a UNESCO World Heritage Site because it's where the whooping cranes go in the summertime to nest. There are only a couple of hundred whooping cranes left, about 283 that make the trip, 40 breeding pairs, give or take. That's where they summer, Aransas National Wildlife Refuge. Now just watch, connect up the dots in your mind's eye before I go to the next slide. Watch where they summer and where they winter. That's Aransas National Wildlife. This right here is a picture taken outside of Denver in about 1880. Between 1850 and 1880, every single railway town west of Denver and east of Reno, south of the US-Canadian border and north, give or take, of Santa Fe, had buffalo skulls like this and bones piled up to be shipped east for fertilizer. This pile is over 30 feet tall. In many cases along the railway lines, they were 1/4 mile long. The population of these things, and by the way, they are wild here. That is the last bastion of true wild wood buffalo in the world. The population is now 2% of what it was when we were doing this. The population of these is about 1% of what it was. All right, so let's keep this in mind here, this line right along here. Same map. That's the Mackenzie River watershed, the Colorado River watershed, the Yukon watershed, the Northwest Passage, and my new colleague Roald Amundsen. The Northwest Passage was first forced by Amundsen between 1903 and 1906. It took him 2 years locked in the ice to get through there. It is now open at least 8 months of the year and probably more, and with icebreakers longer. What it does is it cuts the time it takes to ship natural resources and petroleum products from the sensitive northern slopes of North America to Pacific Rim countries by between 8 days and 2 weeks, which means from a competitive standpoint, everything roughly above the American border is now potentially under pricing pressure from materials sourced in Canada. That right there is the Moab uranium site. All of the uranium that was used in the Manhattan Project came from two places on Earth. One was near Moab in the Utah deserts. The tailings from that were piled up 100 meters, give or take, from the Colorado River behind an earthen berm and are still there. They're in the process of moving them 30 miles away to a more secure area. The company that made that depot paid a $4 million bond that it left. It absconded on the bond, $4 million. The original cleanup estimate was $300 million. The current cost is $720 million. My own estimates for how much it will cost before it's all said and done is $1.2 billion. The rest of the uranium that was used in the Manhattan Project came from Great Bear Lake on the edge of the McKenzie River. We don't know where the tailings piles are up there, and this is no joke. We do not know where they are. That right there is the Syncrude tailings pond. It's an incredibly huge pond that's used for petroleum byproducts. It kills a lot of animals that migrate through there every year, and it is backed up by the largest earthen dam on this planet. The largest earthen dam on this planet backs up a tailings pond. That tailings pond comes from the Athabasca tar sands. We have our own tar sands in Colorado and Utah right on the lower Colorado River. The Keystone Pipeline Corridor comes down the eastern side of the Rockies, and if you'll notice, it's about the same corridor that the whooping cranes use to get to the Northland. And right now, the McKenzie River is not just threatened by, it's going in a fiber optics cable route that they're putting in with these machines that go in along the river and rip up an area about as wide as this room to put in a small channel about 8 inches wide for a fiber optics cable. They're clearly in the process of putting in they plan to put a pipeline so that they can take Athabasca oil to Tuktoyaktuk on the north slope there and make a deep water port in one of the most sensitive areas on Earth. All right, so big picture economic dynamics are this, and this has bearing on your careers. U.S. water shortages are going to continue in the West. Water is going to come south from Canada. They're building dams right now on the Peace River to sell water to the U.S. Canadian petro products are going to go north through the Northwest Passage in one of the most sensitive ecological areas on Earth. And on the lower end, the Colorado watershed is at risk from the Utah-Colorado tar sands. Remember that Elinor Ostrom, and I'm about to come to a close here, Elinor Ostrom's specialty was the tragedy of the commons. It's the way you manage collective resources for collective good. Wendell Berry took an old comment that he probably came from Indian lore, said, we do not inherit the earth from our ancestors, we borrow it from our children. It's been attributed to Thomas Jefferson, and it's probably not accurate. She works specifically on that. Those of you that have administrative careers in mind somewhere down the road, her precepts will be rock solid portions of whatever happens in the next 25 to 50 years minimum. So what can you do? You can support ecological responsibility, and hopefully we'll have a happy ending. Thank you.